Good morning. I'm Tina-Desiree Berg reporting for Status Coup News. We are up in Castroville, which is adjacent to the Moss Landing lithium battery facility that caught on fire and burnt. Obviously, we've been up here all week covering various aspects of this tragedy. I'm here with Supervisor Church, who is with the Board of Supervisors. This is your district that we're in right now. You were at the town hall the other night that we had to kind of leave from, and I know that there were a lot of constituents that still had some questions about getting information out there. Was there any follow-on information, just to start with, that you would want to let the general public know that was not covered that night?
Not really at this point. I think we're all looking for information, and there's a lot of independent and state tests that are out there at this point that we're looking to have data come back any day.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a step forward at this point. But a lot of people in this community, even myself, we have a lot of questions of exactly where do we go from here, what has happened, what's the situation now.
Right. So what has happened, right? So this is a whole new world we're in. There were signs, though, in the past that you were mentioning. There was a couple of things that happened last, I think 2022 was the last one, where there were signs that these lithium batteries could catch fire, could cause some catastrophic damage. And I think you were experiencing some red tape with the state. So your county level, so you have charge over certain jurisdictions like building codes or whatnot, but the state's responsible for safety regulations, et cetera. What is some of the frustrations that you've been experiencing with the state as far as trying to get these guys a little bit more buttoned down?
Sure. Well, what we're facing right here is this is basically a new industry with technology that's evolving all the time.
Yeah.
What was put into place here originally in 2019 and 2020 is now viewed out of date. I mean, this is only 5 years ago. So as I've said many times, we're at a point here where with this technology, government isn't able to regulate it because it doesn't have the full knowledge of what should be done.
I see.
And industry doesn't totally understand it either to have the full knowledge to control it. And I think
or if they do, they're perhaps not sharing it with you guys.
Right. I think there's just a lot of unknowns out there is really where we're at right at this point. You have to look back at every new technology that came out. There used to be a saying back when nuclear power came out that it was going to be too cheap to meter.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
that
sure,
didn't age well.
I'm sure that would be the case if you didn't put in safety protocols.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we're at here. And in many ways is that this was presented as, well, this is a great step forward. This is something that we're going to be able to store renewable energy on. And
which is understandable. Yeah. I think most Californians are behind having renewable energy and green energy. They don't have a problem with that. They want to encourage that. I think what I'm hearing, the frustration from the community is that Vistra didn't necessarily put in the correct safety protocols, but they told the fire department that they did. They told the governor of California that they did. You guys are working from a space of understanding this is what they're telling us. We assume those things are in place when they're not. So I guess people want to know that something's going to be done to hold them accountable for all of those sort of loose ends, so to speak.
Well, I think you got to hold government accountable too.
Right.
This is part of a plan by the state, and as you say, most Californians, I think most people in this country, are in favor of moving forward with technology that will move us out of a carbon environment to a more of a renewable environment, and this is part of that. But the whole thing it comes down to right now is that safety hasn't been put on the same level. And I think what we've come to realize is that there is some real dangers into here. There's some things that really need to be looked at. And as I've said, I don't know if somebody's trying to cover anything up. I think there's just a whole lot of ignorance, frankly, going on, and not understanding what we're dealing with.
Possible.
And I think nobody really knows what the safety protocol. I mean, this was a 5 or 6 years ago set up a state of the art where batteries are going to be put in buildings and stacked upon one another. And now we've moved away from that. Now they're putting them out in the open individually because they realize that's safer. Well, that's the problem. these things should have been looked at a lot more deeply early on, because it is widely known that lithium is highly unstable because it can carry such a high charge.
Yeah. And water has a reaction towards it. So when you're looking at traditional fire protection measures, they don't work. They're not effective. So one of the things the fire chief brought up the other night was this, and his understanding was Vistra has some safety protocol in place to deal with it. But then this happens, and the response from them is just let it burn, which is, as you mentioned the other night, that's not a safety standard. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, what other industry has that kind of safety or lack of safety protocol, I should say? Even when you look at oil companies, as I brought up, then they have an oil spill, they have ways to mitigate it. They go through and they will try to control that spill. They don't say just let it spill. And this is what we're saying here is we're hearing here is that it's just to let it burn. And that's where I have been calling for a pause in this until we can find some safe steps forward. And, it may be there is a way to be able to properly handle lithium safely if we do enough research, or maybe we need to move away from lithium. I mean, the safer batteries now are being considered safer because they're carrying less of a charge. So in that way, it seems to open up the alternative for some of these other alternative energy systems to carry a charge such as electrical charge such as lithium is doing. I mean, there's been talk about sodium ion, for example, but it needs a lot more research into it. I mean, lithium, if you look at it, besides being dangerous and fire prone, it's also very much environmentally destructive. When you look around at what's going on in South America and Africa and other places, it is the mining of it is highly carbon intensive. And there are other alternatives. There's an alternative over in Kern County, which is on the east side of California, where they're putting in developing a cavern down there, which is being created so that it can store compressed air. Now, it's not as effective as lithium is. And I'm sure with oxygen, there's some fire concerns out of that too, but it's not the same. You don't have the heavy metals into it. It's perhaps a lot more control, but it needs to be looked into there. That facility is going through permitting through the state, and it's being somewhat held up as it's going through slow, which I find really ironic. Is that here we have, we have a permitting here for another alternative source that is moving slowly through the state. But when we have these batteries coming in, the state is basically saying it's not doing anything. And so when we come down here at a county level, we don't have that background of support. And that's part what we get from like CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which when we have permits that are put out, we put out permits that come in, we go through and put out the CEQA to state agencies and look for input from them. We have not had any safety input in any of the previous permits.
That's crazy. So speaking on that, then, has Gavin Newsom come in and had any conversation with local stakeholders about what to do now? Because it sounds like when these battery facilities first were put in, they were kind of sort of ramrodded through versus this compressed air idea, which seems safer. Why is that the case? And is there any conversation currently happening with the state on this?
There is conversations with the state. Some state officials came down here, and obviously there's state toxicology officials that are down here and scientists that are doing research around. But at this point, from when this accident happened, there haven't been, to my knowledge, any discussions along that line. And again, it's still relatively, it's early. We're still trying to determine exactly what is out there. This is what I find disturbing and concerning. I know everybody around here is as well. Is nobody's prepared for something of this magnitude, and we are for the county level are constantly having to look toward the state for input. Of
course, because you have only a certain level of jurisdictional power. The state has power above you, so it's imperative that there's a conversation that's had. And I think this is what people are frustrated with. They want, even if the state comes and says to you, Supervisor Church, we don't know yet, we're looking at it, We hear what you're saying. There obviously needs to be safety protocols, regulations put into place. We're not sure what those are going to look like, but we're definitely going to do them. Like, in the very least, you would imagine that that sort of conversation should be happening. And when those conversations don't happen, that's when you have your constituents start to, you know, fill in the details all on their own. And sometimes they get led down the wrong path, right? So.
Right. Well, but there's a vacuum of information.
Right, a vacuum.
Then it opens up for misinformation.
Exactly.
And unanswered questions. And we're there, and I'm hoping in the next few weeks, next few days, that we're going to have some of those questions answered. But
Okay.
I'm also quite aware is that every time you answer a question, you get another question.
Yeah, definitely. I want to ask about the EPA. I know that they came in right after the accident. My understanding is they only tested for the one thing and then left. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
is that accurate?
Well, they did test for hydrofluora,
Which is really deadly.
Which is really deadly. But they also did a test for particulates.
Oh, they did. Okay.
They did test, but they didn't test for the composition of the particulates.
Oh.
So when you look at air quality index, for example, there's 5 or I think 6 different things that are looked at into their CO2 particulates.
Right.
I don't know the others. I'm
Right.
not an expert onto that, but I've looked at that, and they didn't even go into that kind of detail. They went just into the particulates. So when we had reports that were coming out from our air resources people on air pollution, they weren't looking at the metals. They were looking at, well, the same thing as you look at when you have a massive wildfire, or you're burning wood in your stove,
Right.
or
Right.
or pollutants from cars.
Which is different.
The quality.
Mm-hmm. All right. So.
Not the toxic substances.
Right. So, and this is again a whole new level, I guess, because the things you would want to test for here aren't necessarily included in that, which I think is a concern for a lot of the community members. They're coming to learn that.
With these heavy metals, it's not often that you have to go out and test for them like this.
Right.
So, to find those experts and to find how to apply those tests, the best way to do it isn't readily available.
Isn't really, but yeah. In fact, so I'm going to read this. This was a doctor, coming from a doctor that posted from one of your constituents. I'm going to read this because I think it sort of locks into what you're talking about right now. So it says, "Good morning," person's name, I'll redact that. "Unfortunately, tests are only as good as the individual tests themselves. The heavy metal panel only includes arsenic, lead, and mercury." So that's the standard blood test, I guess, they would do if they were just testing for heavy metals. Obviously, what we're dealing here with lithium is different. So the doctor goes on to say, "I looked into the soil contamination because by the Moss Landing fire, I have entered in blood test orders for the following metals: cobalt, cadmium, nickel, manganese, and copper." So here's a doctor that proactively kind of looked into what they might be looking at as far as heavy metal contaminants and did his own separate thing. And I think this is really important information because now at least the community goes, oh, these are the ones that we should be getting tested for to see if that's a problem or not. Is there a way for public health to get that information more spread out? Is that something maybe they should be looking at?
Well, I mean, those heavy metals you mentioned there, and the cadmium, I'm not sure if I've heard that mentioned a lot.
I have no idea either.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't ring a bell right now. I mean, the 3 prominent ones we're looking at, of course, is cobalt, nickel, and manganese, and I've heard copper because that's inside there as well. So, those are things we knew to look out for pretty quickly, and I think there are a lot of different tests being done onto this. There was obviously a doctor at the Moss Landing Marine Labs who came out with something for along the Elkhorn Slough, which is a very sensitive environmental area, and then we have the state came in and has looked for this too with the county, but it's the state that's done the testing. There's an independent group that's out there in the community from an independent lab that is, I think they sent out about 125 swabs.
Right, and those are coming back, I think, on Friday?
That's what I hear,
Okay.
That's what I hear very shortly. So all those were testing for roughly the same things out of there. So I think, that's a good sign that we knew where to go forth onto there.
Right. No, it is definitely some guidance. So I do have a question here from a constituent. She wants to know, are there any cleanup procedures that are being put in place Or are they just going to open the facility and do business as usual? What's the plan with that?
No, there's definitely cleanup. They do have to go in and get some demolition permits from the county, but this is a lot different than just having a building that needs to be demolished.
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
we're
exactly.
dealing with, there's maybe unburned lithium there, there's toxic substances. So it involves monitoring from the state, from the county. It involves, Vistra is the one that have to pay for that,
right,
of course, and they've got to, get their own experts in there too to evaluate things. So it's going to be many months to clean that up, because it's going to have to be done very deliberately and very slowly. You don't want to reignite a fire, for example.
No, not with the lithium, especially when, we have rain, a lot of rain today. Well, is there any concern about that because of the water reaction?
Well, there obviously was a lot of concern as the rain started up last week.
Yeah.
And that's where we had North County Fire put out an advisory, being concerned that, hey, this could reignite. And I've had many conversations with them as they explained what the concern was.
Right.
But we've had quite a bit of rain this last week, and that we've gotten by without anything happening, I think
knock on wood.
is really a good sign.
Yeah.
And so I'm a lot more comfortable than I was a few days ago.
No kidding.
Is that even if we get more rain, that maybe we've avoided further catastrophe.
Indeed. I did want to go back and talk a little bit about regulatory capture. There's concerns that the PCU, which is sort of responsible to oversee all of these utility companies, they were formed out of when we started privatizing different utilities that were in the state. It was all government run previously. Now we have a mixed bag of both. But they're supposed to be the responsible regulatory body. But the concern is that we have people that are serving in that capacity that come from the industry. They've worked at PG&E or wherever else, Southern California, Edison, whatever. They go into that, regulatory body, and they still have, corporate protection on their mind versus consumer protection. And then they go back out and get, another big paycheck after they leave. Like, do you have any concern over that, or what are your thoughts?
And I think you meant PUC.
Oh, sorry, PUC.
The California
Public
Public Utilities Commission.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of letters to throw around here, so it's pretty...
What are the alphabet soups?
It's pretty easy to talk.
Yes, PUC, my part.
No problem. I just want to clarify it for anybody who's listening there. 100%. So it is the California Public Utilities Commission. And, realistically, I think that might be a problem when we look at all regulatory agencies, not in just this state,
yes.
not, in other states and in the federal government. If you're looking for experts, where are you going to find those experts?
Yeah.
They're going to be coming from industry, or they might come from an academic background, but that isn't always practical. It's not sometimes a lot more theoretical. So if you're going to want people that are going to understand this, you're going to pull it from the industry, and you're going to have various opinions. You're going to have people that tend to be more pro-industry, and there might be people who are just dissatisfied. I've seen, there was about 60 years ago, we had a big issue down here where there was going to be in this county, a large oil refinery put in and a large industrialization. And the opponents who came up strongest against that actually some of them had been part of the oil industry.
That's not surprising.
So
Tom Steyer would be a great example of that, right?
Right. So, you get both sides.
Right. That's true. All right. So that's a good question. You brought up some other alternatives. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is hydrogen fuel cells. Mm-hmm. I know that, for example, the state has hydrogen fuel cell cars that they're using right now as an alternative to electric vehicles. I believe Honda is going to be releasing some model of that to the general public this year. I don't know if there's any capacity to use those as far as generating electricity, whatnot, but there's probably other things as well. Do you think at some point we should be looking, just say maybe these things are just, too dangerous, like you mentioned earlier, and be exploring these other things? Because I think a lot of people want to make it about fossil fuels or this thing at this point when there's a whole entire world of alternatives.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I mean, it isn't just lithium.
Right.
Lithium was picked because it could hold so much more energy than anything else, and it was relatively easy to develop those batteries and get them out because we had the technology. But the problem is we haven't looked at the safety. You got to weigh in what's going to make everything safe and on a level playing field. I mean, we should be working and looking real deeply, more deeply than we are, into these alternatives. And that's why, when I see things such as this compressed air facility in Kern County, it's a step forward. And I know there's others that are being explored. We just can't hook our horse just to one wagon,
right,
and count on that's going to get us
right.
there. I mean, this is again what I've asked for is we should have a pause, and I know the state has plans on wanting to be carbon free by 2045, but so maybe we get carbon free in 2048.
Yeah, safely.
Safely. That's the thing, and it's a safer situation. The public has more trust into what is out there, and that isn't going to dramatically affect how where we're getting at in terms of of renewables, in terms of being carbon free.
Right.
But it's going to mean that you're going to have trust in the public. It means you're going to have safer technology, and we're going to have done it right.
Correct. That sounds good to me. I have one last question before
Sure.
you go. I know you need to get back to work here. There's also a broad concern about the heavy metals leaching into the soil, and that being a longer term problem, not a short term one. Folks know that Salinas, Castroville, all of these areas are very much the quote unquote salad bowl of America, right? A lot of vegetables and fruits are grown here, not only just for consumption here in California, but other states as well. It's a big industry. What are your thoughts on that? Is there concern there? I know that, for instance, when there's like E. coli outbreaks, there's, personal liability to the farm to be responsible for handling that versus like trying to track it further down the line as it used to be. I don't think that those regulations are in place currently for heavy metals and things of this nature, but that's also something that could eventually affect their business.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, well, obviously that's a concern, and as you said, the salad bowl of the world, it is a big concern. I think what we have to do is we have to get some of this data in to just see how far this is spread.
Right. That's the first thing.
One thing to take into consideration is that this is actually at the very, very northern part of the valley. I mean, it's actually, I guess almost out of the valley. And so the area around there, and it isn't good for my constituents, and I live out in that community too, but there isn't nearly as much agriculture out into those hilly areas that are out here, these
which are the mainly affected areas,
which appears at this point to have been the mainly affected, but we won't know till we do further studies. But it's got to have those tests and see just how far it's spread at this point. At this point, it's hard to put
we just don't know yet.
Hard to put your finger on is just what is the concern. I mean, we know that there's concerns along the Elkhorn Slough from what has been done by the Moss Landing Marine Labs onto there.
Oh, speak a little bit about that. Do they have different various results showing? Because that's right adjacent to where the plant was. And then also, I believe they were using the water to cool down the batteries.
No, they're not using the water for anything on that. That was actually one of the reasons that the original power plant was put there in around 1950 was because it was a petroleum and natural gas plant.
Okay.
And so the water was necessary for that functioning. For these batteries,
but not
it's
anymore.
not. I mean,
right
now.
So I heard some people discussing that out in the community. They weren't sure if that was a concern. So that's good news.
Yeah.
All right. So I know you got to get back to work. Do you have any parting thoughts you want to share?
Mainly just that.
Yeah.
I hope we get the answers to all the questions, and that no other community ever has to go through this again.
Yeah, indeed. So we just have to wait and see what's coming back. So we've got the test results coming Friday. We have more soil samples that are going to be done. So right now we're just sort of in an informational holding pattern, it sounds like.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Tina.
your time, Supervisor Church.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. We will be doing some more interviews later on today. If you want to stay tuned, make sure you like that little signal button so you get a notice when we go live. And we'll see you guys soon. Wait, what am I reading?
Whoops. Just sign up as a member.
Yeah, I'll do that the next one.
Okay.